Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Hope you had a very Merry Christmas and enjoyed yourself in and among the fun and games that Tottenham Hotspur bring into all of our lives. I was at the Boxing Day match covering that game, and then I watched the Norwich game on the telly because I've actually managed to get myself a week off. While I've said in the past I'm always a little bit reticent to talk about matches I've just watched on telly because although you see little bits and pieces, maybe more kind of up close replays, things like that, than you do at a game, I kind of do feel you lose slightly the overall picture of how the match played out and the formations, the way everything looked and set up, and obviously little behind the scenes things and the way things happen with the players and the manager and stuff like that. But I thought, why not anyway? It's Christmas, and why not end the year with a little bit of Tottenham Hotspur chat anyway? Brighton game. Spurs finally waking up really later on in the match. Two fabulous finishes, which pretty much went against the grain of Tottenham's performance on the day. Kane's lovely volley on the fall, and then Dele Alli's kind of cushioned, what was it? I suppose half volley into the over the keeper, which was they were just lovely goals, worthy of winning any football match. Spurs perhaps probably rode their luck slightly. Another one of these kind of performances where they don't look entirely comfortable, either in defence or going forward. And I think they carried a lot of that into the Norwich game as well. Norwich, perhaps unfortunate, not really, to take all the points on the day. I know Spurs were much, much stronger in the second half, and it was very much a changed team, wasn't it? A team without any real defensive players in the middle because you had that back three with Sessegnon and Aurier out wide. It was just messy. It was very messy again, and I don't mean Lionel. I mean proper Spurs messy. Just disappointing. I think we have to acknowledge, obviously, Jose Mourinho has not had enough time yet, really, to work with these players. I know he's been there for a month or two now, but in terms of actually settled down and working with the players, there hasn't been much of that purely because of bang, 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 game after game. You know, we know, as we made a big deal of, only before the Chelsea game, that was the first week he'd had to properly work with the players, and obviously it didn't actually work out in the end. But you know what I mean. He needs to get his methods, and we know Mourinho defences over the years. We know the ridiculously tight, stingy defences of the teams that he's had, and this Tottenham Hotspur defence is an absolute aberration right now. Pochettino was terrific with Spurs defence. We mustn't forget that as well. He created a team that certainly, in the 2 years they were challenging at the very top, pretty sure one year they were clearly the best or least conceded goals in the Premier League, and the second one I think they were joint. He had properly sorted out that team. The defence that we're seeing now at Tottenham Hotspur is just mistake after mistake after mistake, and we're talking about experienced players. We're talking about Serge Aurier, of course, because Serge Aurier has that horrendous mistake in him in every game. And against Norwich, obviously, partly his fault. I don't think he deserves the full blame for the goal because obviously own goals often come from something else as well. Communication I think was the biggest problem there. But it needs fixing. It's defence that is entirely broken, and I'm very worried if the future is deemed to be that defence because it's just not really working, is it? I thought we could see little kind of shoots of recovery, but they're just now conceding goals and one or two against any team in the league. We're not talking about the team, the country's best. We're talking about, no offence to them because they're playing very good football, Norwich and Brighton as well. But we're talking about just any team can score against Tottenham. I think it's only Burnley, isn't it, in the Mourinho era that's managed to, or not managed to get the ball past Paulo Gazzaniga. It needs a lot of work. I'm trying to think of the goals now. Eriksen, wasn't it? Free kick. Eriksen finally coming back into the world. The Christian Eriksen we kind of used to know. Very nice free kick, slight deflection, but my goodness, has Spurs been crying out for Eriksen set pieces to be that decent for a while. And I think he's done a couple under Mourinho, hasn't he? One that Vertonghen scored the header from. I think he set up another goal as well from a free kick, I seem to remember, late on in the game. He's got it about him. But then you see late in the match when Spurs needed desperately a corner to get into the box, he can't beat the first man. There was one ridiculous corner in the game as well when Norwich were down to 10 men, had one of the central defenders went off with a whack, I think to his head, and Spurs took a short corner and wasted the opportunity. It's absolutely mind-boggling how that would work when you know you've got that extra man to overload into the box. But there you go. And then Harry Kane obviously rescuing the points with that penalty at the end, or near the end, which was a penalty, wasn't it? VAR again played its part. Anyone that's listened to these, you know my thoughts on VAR. And funnily enough, the International Football Association Board have come out in the last couple of days and kind of said something similar to what I've been saying, and that the Premier League are not using it correctly, especially when it comes to offsides. You know, it's meant to be there for clear and obvious errors, and that also includes. I know some people have been saying it doesn't include offsides. Well, the IFAB have actually come out and said no, it does. It is meant to be in these circumstances as well. It's meant to be used in that respect. And for me, and I've always said it, if it takes you more than 10-15 seconds to look at a screen image, a couple of angles, and you can't get a decision by that point, it's not a clear and obvious error. Let's move on. Whatever the decision was, it stands. If you're going to take 2 minutes, 3 minutes, poring over different angles from all over the place, trying to work out whether this happened or not, it's not clear and obvious. You just don't do it. And that's why there's a part of me that kind of feels, yeah, let the referee run over and look at the screen, because he's not going to muck around for ages. He's just going to go to it and say, I can't really see much of a difference in what I've said. You know, there are occasions when, you know, and I think this is the thing as well, and people aren't denying that these VAR decisions are correct. As to the information you're given, yeah, even if it's half a foot, it is offside, as in a person's foot rather than a foot. But there's also this element of doubt because of frame rates, because of angles, because of when the actual initial image is taken. And that all leads me to just think, if you cannot tell within 10 to 15 seconds, move on. Just get on with the game, accept the decision, move on, because we're talking about it far too much. And that's why I'm not going to talk about it anymore, because it just winds me up thinking about it. I don't think football was as broken before that it needed VAR to this ridiculous degree. So let's talk about some positives. Although the results weren't, you know, exactly what Tottenham wanted, probably wanted the 6 points, I'd imagine, from the 2 games. It was only 4. I thought Tonga and Ndombele was a massive, massive positive. Bearing in mind all the controversy we had after the game against Brighton, when he said he couldn't play, or he told Mourinho that he didn't feel quite right. Some reports in France were saying there was an adductor issue, which is a muscle. I'm trying to think, adductor, I think it's stomach, isn't it? Look that up, because I'm absolutely no expert on muscles in the body. But he had this thing, and I watched him after the Brighton game training out on the pitch with the other players as well, and it was very, very awkward, and Mourinho was a bit like, I don't know, I can't really say whether that he's injured, because he's not. He's just asked not to play for fear of previous injuries. So what I thought was massively important was, after that, not to become this kind of target for Mourinho, this player who's a little bit of a, kind of wimping out of matches and things like that. It was so important he came into this game, and not only did he play first half more in a kind of almost a defensive role, which is not his best position. I think you saw that. But I think it was so important for him to play 90 minutes and also, or 97 minutes, but also in that second half, come on really, really strong. He was superb second half. Once they kind of moved things around a little bit, it went back to, it was more of a back 4, wasn't it? And I think that almost unlocked on Ndombele, and just I saw this highlights reel of what he did in the game. Honestly, the man for me, and I know I've said it before, but I will continue to use it, he's like Moussa Dembele with the final third stuff about him. Just absolutely so strong on the ball. You cannot shake him off it. His passing's very good. Everything's progressive. That's what I love. I hate to watch footballers will beat a man and then the ball will come sideways. I think that was always my one thing that bugged me about Ndombele, was he had the ability to whatever he wanted with that football, and then he'd pass it sideways or backwards. Whereas I do, hopefully, obviously he's still got a long way to go, but on Ndombele appears to get forward, to push forward, to pass forward, to always look forward. And I think that's so important in football today. And I think they're the footballers that are gold to us, those rare kind of players that can unlock a defence, unlock a midfield, do exactly what you want them to do. So this was enormously positive. In a game that really wasn't full of positives, I thought, on Ndombele. And actually Mourinho, fair play to him afterwards, said the words I heard on the TV interview is absolutely phenomenal, was how he described his performance. And I think that's massive for the player, and I think that he got through the match and didn't look knackered as it went on, because in my mind, you build your midfield around Ndombele. I think whatever gives him the platform to do what he does, let him do it, because I think you get the best Tottenham if you get the best Ndombele out on that pitch. He can be absolutely magnificent. You know, he was Spurs club record signing. It could cost 64 million in all, 63, 64. Let him show why, because he's phenomenal. A few look positive. I think Christian Eriksen as well. I know he gets a lot of flack, and I know a lot of that becomes because of his drop in form, his unsettled future, which I do wonder whether we're going to find out in the next week or so what exactly is happening there, because I think it's. I mean, this was the first game he started under Mourinho in the Premier League, and I think that wouldn't have happened were it not a fixture where Mourinho had to bring in other players due to fitness issues. But I thought Eriksen last couple of games has done well. I thought he's shown little glimpses of the player that we all knew, and I thought, you know, obviously the free kick, and then he was involved with Ali's goal against Brighton as well. He's had a positive influence. I think that's all you can ask. If he's on his way out, if another club is to be found next month, or has already been found, he's still got to contribute until the final day he walks out of that door at Tottenham Hotspur, and I think that's quite important for him as well. Negatives, Foyth had one of his mares, which is such a shame, because I really do rate Juan Foyth. I know he splits opinion sometimes, but I think there's a really fantastic central defender or a defensive midfielder in there. I just think he had one of those moments. You know, some people said he's fouled. Perhaps he was, but I want to see more strength on that ball and using it better before that kind of fouling, challenge, elbow, whatever you want to call it, comes in. I thought Vertonghen was woeful as well. I think the goal that was ruled out by VAR, I think he was incredibly fortunate. He was absolutely half asleep. And you know my views on Serge Aurier. I really, really hope he can be so much more than he currently is, but I just don't know if we'll ever see that at Tottenham Hotspur. There were positives in there, and Harry Kane. You know, how can I forget Harry Kane? Honestly, I think the service he's had, the goals he's scored, is ridiculous when you put those two things together, because he's had naff all service. If you look at them, I mean, like the goal against Brighton, all his own making from a deflected, the ball deflecting into his path. Goal against Norwich, penalty. He won the penalty himself. He's had, you see him on England duty, he's scoring hat-tricks after hat-tricks because he's getting assists from all angles. Plays for Tottenham Hotspur, he's having to create everything himself. And the fact that it was his 200th appearance against Norwich, he's got 136 Premier League goals. That's just astonishing when you work that out from 200 performances. If you're going to go over the decade, only Aguero has scored more this decade in the Premier League than Harry Kane. If you're going to go players to have scored as many in 200 appearances, only Aguero and Shearer have scored more than him, and we're talking marginal, especially with Shearer as well. And what you also have to look at in that decade, because Aguero is a little bit ahead of him, but in that decade, Harry Kane's first goal came in April 2014 in the Premier League. That's what we're talking about. We are literally talking about the second half of a decade, and he scored 136 Premier League goals. He's sensational. He really is. He's another one that gets flack from people, God, one season wonder, the worst, most ridiculous chant of all time. People claiming that, he dips in form, he's not the player he was. Any striker needs service. They do. But look at his stats. He's still outscoring most strikers in the Premier League. Purely, when you look at the chances created for him, I'd love to see how that stacks up against anyone that's got more than him and the chances that are being created for them. He is a phenomenal player, and I think sometimes people just forget what they've got, because Spurs are very, very lucky to have Harry Kane. Pochettino did a hell of a lot for him, helped develop him, but Spurs are still very, very fortunate to have a player like Harry Kane up front. They really are. January transfer window. Let's talk about it. It's there. It's there. I'm still very much doubt how much kind of business Tottenham Hotspur are going to do, certainly in terms of incomings. I've had chats with quite a few people inside the club in the last month or so, and the general feeling is there's not going to be much done. If there is anything done, it will be, as Mourinho's since said as well, reacting to players leaving. So then it depends who's going, and I think Mourinho doesn't seem to be keen to get rid of too many. I think you'll see probably Wanyama move on. Eriksen's future could be resolved. We could find out. I think Spurs will have done very well if they get rid of him next month, which sounds ridiculous when you think of the player he was. But in terms of taking 5-10 million, whatever you can get for him, or putting him in a deal for someone else, if you wanted to be that bold, then I think it would be a great bit of business. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck with this player who's just going to be playing a bench role, and is on a fair whack of money. We're not talking about nothing until the end of the season, which, yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, he has played well in the last couple of games. I do feel he's contributed something, but whether he will continue that, knowing that he's got a deal to go elsewhere and won't want to get himself injured, that's another thing. Kyle Walker-Peters, I'd be very surprised if there's not a loan move sorted out for him, because it's two managers now that just don't seem to rate him at all. I mean, he's not even involved. Danny Rose, I think he's got a muscular injury. My colleague from PA, John Veal, I noticed, put that out after the Norwich match. He's, I don't think you're going to get Danny Rose out the door. I don't think he's going to play a lot of matches. I think you're going to see Vertonghen, that's going to be his role, and I wouldn't be stunned if Vertonghen signs a new deal. I think that's what they're going to try and get. And then you've got Sessegnon as well, who, despite all the claims, wasn't going to be a left-back. Obviously, at Norwich, he ended up being there, didn't he? Left wing-back and then became a left-back as it went on. I didn't think he did that badly. I felt he needs to still be more progressive, like I was saying about Ndombele. I felt he cut inside too many times, which has also been an issue I felt with Kyle Walker-Peters since he kind of burst onto the scene and was so proactive in setting up chances. But I think we'll see Jack Clark's definitely obviously going to be recalled. So is Cameron Carter-Vickers. I think Jack Clark maybe is one that Mourinho will have a little look at before he sends him, maybe sends him back out somewhere into the Championship. Carter-Vickers is an interesting one. He might well want to have a little look at him. I don't know whether he can come in and make a big impact on the central defenders that are there. I think you've probably got too many people still ahead of him. I would be stunned if he doesn't head back out, or perhaps someone has been inquiring about a permanent deal for him. I imagine it's more likely to be a loan though. I wouldn't get your hopes up about anything particularly sexy happening in the transfer window. I don't think there's going to be a big deal. I know certain Welshmen at Real Madrid, the name just keeps coming up and up and up again. But as I always say when it comes to Gareth Bale, look at the numbers involved. Look at the finances. Every year I have people that get quite angry when I say that. And they say, oh, but look at this and look what can be done. And now obviously they've started up again. Every year we have this same chat. He's come in, but even though he doesn't each summer, there's this new thing. The new kind of renewed belief that he's going to come in the next window. He's on silly money. We're talking 3 times a week what Harry Kane's on. There would have to be the most incredible compromise and ridiculous funding somehow to go on to bring him back to Spurs. And I just think it's an enormous, very un-Spurs-like gamble. A guy in his 30s that's had injury problems. I can't see it. I just cannot see it. And I do feel that in the attacking areas, I don't think Spurs have that many problems. I know he was a wonderful player, Bale, but I don't know if that's going to be a real area that's a priority. I think you have to look at the defence, don't you? I think you have to look at that defence and think that's, if you're going to throw any money anywhere, throw it at that defence, brick it up, honestly. Sort that right-back position out as well, because it's an absolute mess. And if Walker-Peters does go out on loan, that's maybe your excuse to go out and bring in another right-back to battle with Aurier. You know, big fan of Max Aarons, and I thought he looked really good again against Spurs at the weekend. Very, I hate to use the word again, but progressive player, looks to kind of force the play, which I think is so important. It's about being brave, isn't it, and not just playing it safe. So worth keeping an eye on. I think Bruno Fernandez one's probably gone quite cold in terms of attacking midfielders because he's signed that new deal. albeit with the same release clause, but we're talking, I think, something like 80 million, 89 million, something like that. So we're not talking about a little release clause. I think he's probably one that people will look at again in the summer. But like I say, if you're going to go for anything, please sort out the defence, because it's a bit of a shambles. As we've got the new year coming as well, end of a decade, just a little look back on a decade. Everyone's been doing, and I did this, have a little look on football.london, because I did this a few months back, but it just reminded me, I've seen various people doing it, their team of the decade. You're not going to agree with this. I'm going to put that out there straight away. A bit like my player ratings and things like that, and people get themselves very agitated. I saw poor Rob Guesty is filling in for me at the Norwich match, and he did his player ratings, and he got absolutely, some of the replies, incredible. It's opinion. It's people's opinion. It's my opinion. It's Guesty's opinion. It's football opinion. That's what it's all about. You can't be right and you can't be wrong, because it's your opinion. It's very subjective, and that's what ratings and that's what these teams are. So this is my team of the decade. It's very much based on, I would even say it's not based on stats and figures. I'd say some of it is based on emotion, and I'll explain which ones as well. Players that if I could pick my team for the decade, this would be it. So let's crack straight into it. It's a 4-2-3-1 formation. I had to think about it for a minute. So I'm going Hugo Lloris in goal. For me, no goalkeeper in the last decade at Tottenham Hotspur has come close. Back four. Fullbacks, Kyle Walker and Danny Rose. I'm sure everyone else has their favourites, a different kind of ones, and people will have their gripes with Walker the way he left. They'll have their gripes with Danny Rose the way he might have dealt with certain things. Again, for me, Walker and Rose at their peak, two best fullbacks probably in Europe for me. Central defence, this is where we're going to differ. Jan Vertonghen, I'm going to have him in there because I feel probably in the last 5-6 years, arguably has been Spurs' most consistent defender. He's had his wobbles this year. This is not the same Jan Vertonghen, but we've got to make sure when we're doing these teams, we're not basing it on the now. We're basing it on a decade, and I think Vertonghen has been superb. I'm not going to put in his Belgian partner, though. I'm not going to put in Toby Alderweireld. Toby Alderweireld has been fantastic, but because we're talking about a decade, I'm going to sneak in Ledley King. Yes, I can already hear the voices from the back of my mind saying, but Ledley King, by the time in the last decade, he wasn't the Ledley King who was at his peak. He wasn't the best. I don't care. I don't care. That's the beauty. This is what I'm saying about subjectivity. Ledley King, he had a couple of years into the decade with Spurs. He was still being wheeled out to perform in massive matches without any training. For me, he was still being one of the best defenders around, despite the fact that he couldn't train and, as we know, had one knee. So I'm going to sneak him in there because I just think, for me, there's never been a better defender in my lifetime, actually, as Ledley King. I just think the guy is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal with what he was able to do. You just wonder, I think he did it so early in his career, didn't he? It was like one of his early games. I remember he actually did the knee injury that would always haunt him. You think without that knee problem, what that guy could have been for club and country. He's just a phenomenal player. So I'm going to put him in there. And I'm sorry, Toby Alderweireld. I'm sure you're absolutely devastated to not be in my team of the decade, but you're on the bench. I will name a bench as well. I've gone for that as well. So that's my defence. Walker, King, Vertonghen, Rose. Central midfield. Again, not everyone will like this. Luka Modric would be my first pick. Again, another player who upset a lot of people when he left. He's one of the best players in the world. And at Tottenham Hotspur, he was phenomenal. The day he played against Stoke and showed whatever, Harry Redknapp, I remember saying, he kept shifting him out to the wide positions. I think it was mostly left he'd played him. And he had this thing about, he can't really handle the hustle and bustle of the Premier League. Played against Stoke, the most physical team going, and absolutely destroyed them. Luka Modric is an amazing player. I mean, he was World Player of the Year, wasn't he? Was it last year? He's brilliant. Despite any personal reservations people might have about the way he conducted himself when he left, anything like that, he was an incredible player. And one of the, if not right up there with the most talented players Spurs have had in the past decade. I'm sticking him alongside Ndombele. Moussa Dembele, despite my reservations about what he'd do in the final third, was just an absolute machine when it came to keeping possession and destroying teams' setup. He was able those teams that would set up in these rigid lines, he could break the lines and then just give the ball to other players to do their thing. And I just think, in my head, a partnership of him and Modric just would have been phenomenal. Like I say, I still believe, hopefully when I do, if I'm in a position to do the team of next decade, I really hope that Ndombele has taken on the Dembele mantle and been even better. But that's my central pairing. And then my three behind the striker. Again, we're going to have very much debate over this, no doubt. I'm going for Christian Eriksen in one of those roles. Again, despite what he's doing right now, despite the fact that obviously he's a shadow of the player he was, what a player he was. This is the one where I am definitely going to talk about, or look at stats. You look at the numbers of goals he scored, the numbers of goals he's created. This is one of the Premier League's most productive, creative players, and guy that ran more than anyone else as well, on top of all of that. He's been a brilliant player for Tottenham Hotspur. Whatever people's feelings about him now, and I know some people, they won't even call him Eriksen, will they? Call him number 23, all of this stuff because he's on the way out. He was still a fantastic player, and you cannot forget what people have done for you over the years, so I'm having him in there. Gareth Bale. I'm going to put Gareth Bale in there because for me, he was an absolute one-man army at times for Tottenham Hotspur. Do you remember that season under AVB when essentially he swept Tottenham up the table pretty much all by himself? He was brilliant. He was absolutely phenomenal. That goal against West Ham, when everyone thought the game was done, and he still found that bit of quality to just ping one into the top corner. That's up there. I'm going to do my goal of the decade, and that certainly would be one that's up there. And then my final one. Now, this one is probably the one that I found the toughest to do. And this is where I'm going to go back to emotion. I could have had Dele Alli quite easily. I think Dele Alli in his first 3-4 years or so at Spurs has been amazing, has done so much. You know, I know he had a little bit of he's had probably the last year until the last couple of months have been poor by his standards. He's a very young player. It's really difficult to say about standards. So I think he would very much deserve to be in there. Son Heung-min has been fantastic. After a kind of uninspiring first year, 18 months, very inconsistent or so, I feel he kind of found his place. And I think he's one of these guys that is just such a wonderful person as well. I know he's had his red card issues as well. But I think as a person, he's such a lovely guy to interview. I think he scores goals, he sets up goals, he's fantastic. And he had every right to be in this team as well. But I haven't picked either of those players. I've gone for Rafael van der Vaart. And I know that will wind some people up. And I know some people will think, why the hell have you missed out either one of those two players you've just mentioned? Because just for me, Rafael van der Vaart just represented everything about Tottenham Hotspur that kind of excited me at that point. He was, you will, probably until Ndombele, and even that, he wasn't a known quantity around the world. I think as soon as Van der Vaart signed, for me, that was probably the biggest signing since Klinsmann for Spurs. Such an incredible transfer deadline day deal. You know, we mock Spurs and their deadline day deals and Daniel Levy, but that was the one, wasn't it? That kind of almost justified all the others because it was so cool. And I thought he was just fun. He was just a really entertaining player to watch. He was so talented. Yeah, he was shattered. A bit like Ndombele has been this season. By about an hour mark, he'd been absolutely blowing Van der Vaart. He was knackered. Fitness-wise, he wasn't the greatest, but he was just so intelligent with the ball and his use of it, and it was just a joy to watch, and that's why I'm putting him in there. As I said, I think hopefully my team of next decade will have Ali, will have Son in it. I just feel that just for kind of personal reasons, taking all off the pitch stuff aside, taking that away, I'm talking purely about players on the pitch. I just had that connection with Van der Vaart as a player who I just love to watch play football, and that's why he's getting in there. And I'm also going to name my subs bench. I'm not going to go into detail because I've kind of waffled on a bit long, but I'm going to go for Gomez because there weren't many other goalkeepers. But he also was a great shot stopper. Kieran Trippier, Toby Alderweireld, Dele Alli, Son, and I'm going to put Jermaine Defoe and Robbie Keane in there as well. It's a very attacking, very, very attacking bench. But it's my bench. Goal of the decade. I mentioned one. The Bale one against West Ham was superb. I loved watching replays of that goal. But for me, there's only one possible goal of the decade for me, and it came, well, as close to the end of it as you're going to get. Lucas Mora. Lucas Mora. That night in Amsterdam, honestly, never has a goal been so beautiful and meant so much in one moment. I was obviously very fortunate enough to be there in person. Incredible moment. Beer thrown on me from the angry Dutch fans of the Ajax fans above. All the journalists absolutely got coated in it. They were so angry. But everywhere else, just silence, apart from just hearing those Spurs fans, just the disbelief at first, and then this kind of roar of noise. It was beautiful, yet so old school English football. You know, a booted ball up from the back, De Ligt getting there ahead of Llorente, Dele Alli with the cleverest of no-look passes, and Lucas Moura with the most clinical of finishes to complete a hat-trick, to absolutely throw Ajax into despair and create with Tottenham just a magical moment that hasn't been seen in decades. You know, it put Tottenham Hotspur into the Champions League final, regardless of what happened in Madrid and the disappointment of that. That moment, that goal for me, it's just, and even watching it back, I didn't get the TV commentary obviously because I was there, and coming back and listening to the, I think it was Darren Fletcher did the BT commentary alongside Jermaine Genius. I really apologise if that's the wrong commentator name, but just phenomenal. That was phenomenal as well. And when you watch it back, it just gives you chills. I'm getting chills just now thinking about it. What a goal. And in the moments in football that we all live for a player, it must be phenomenal. For the fans, it's amazing. And as a journalist, just incredibly fortunate and grateful to be able to report on it, which is just football at its finest. It really was. So that's why, for me, goal of the decade is Lucas Moura's wonderful goal to complete his hat-trick in the Champions League in Amsterdam. And just a very, very brief look back on 2019. I won't keep you too long. I've already waffled on long enough, but it's been a weird year. You know, we've had a goal like that. We've had the highs of the Champions League campaign, the ups and downs of the Premier League time. Obviously, the form hasn't been good enough. Spurs have lost probably their best manager of the modern era, Mourinho Pochettino. He is headed off and, told to go, which, you know, you go back to that moment in Amsterdam, him roaring on the pitch, drinking beer with the players. Could you imagine that even 4 or 5 months later he wasn't going to be at Tottenham Hotspur anymore? It's incredible. There is still a part of me that believes that one day I think he will come back as a manager of Tottenham Hotspur. I don't think it'll be for a while, but you know, if David Moyes can go back to West Ham, then I think as I say, the greatest manager of Spurs' modern era can come back to Tottenham Hotspur in the future. And now, you know, in the last month or so, 2 months of the decade, Jose Mourinho, the man that probably no one thought would be Tottenham Hotspur manager, now is. He's got a big challenge on his hand, a lot of work to do. But yeah, it's been such a weird decade, hasn't it? When you look at the changes, we've had AVB in that decade. You've had, Tim Sherwood. You almost forget that he was manager for a little while. Tim Sherwood and his Gile, those strange months where, it was like a kind of a light version of Harry Redknapp, wasn't he? And I think that's part of the decade that's probably worth just glossing over quickly. But yeah, it's been a weird day. It's been Tottenham Hotspur. It's Tottenham Hotspur. So you think how much happens in a week with Tottenham Hotspur, how much happens in a decade. It's been a crazy one. And let's hope the next decade brings some silverware. I think that's what all Spurs fans are looking for, and I think that's what the players, the club, you know, certainly Daniel Levy said at the Christmas party, that's what he wants in his Christmas wish list. And let's see if Jose Mourinho is the man to bring it. His CV certainly says he has, but Southampton up next. They're going to be no pushovers. Their recent run of form has improved massively. Unbeaten in the last 3, 1-2, draw the last one. Obviously beating Chelsea as well, didn't they? They really have kind of started to find their feet again. It's going to be incredibly tough. If Spurs play in any of the way they have in the last couple of games, they're going to struggle. I'm really interested to see what team he puts out. I think you've obviously had those couple of games where you had to mix it up, and now you're going to see a blend of the two teams put together. I'm hoping Tonga and Ndombele is back in that midfield again. I still wonder whether, I know people don't rate Eric Dyer, but I still wonder whether a player like Eric Dyer frees up on Ndombele to do what he does best. We shall see. But yeah, what a decade. Mad decade. So many highs, probably not as many lows. I think that's the thing. I think certainly what we've been used to in decades before that, probably not as many lows, but still not that silverware. Let's hope the next decade brings some of that as well. I probably won't do another one of these until 2020. So have a wonderful and very happy new year, all of you, and I shall catch you in the next decade. Talk to you then.